Rejected, throwing away, affected. I don't know what to say. Ejected, cast out to the sea, disconnected. They didn't want me.
Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Nicksmissal IV, the final chapter. I am Patricia and I'm here with Admin James.
Here.
So today we're going to be discussing about Avatar: The Search. Now we're now referring to the comic book, but we are discussing about something very similar. So back around 2012, creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, wanted to release a TV movie based off of Avatar: The Last Airbender called Avatar: The Search. Their idea was that they wanted to have a 90-minute TV movie that would have answered the biggest question that was left unanswered in the show. Where was Zuko's mother? Now, around the time that they pitched it to Nickelodeon, they were doing The Legend of Korra. And, yeah, everybody knows about the gigantic mess that Nickelodeon was doing to The Legend of Korra, about how they didn't want to pick it up because it had a female protagonist, and they decided to give them one season. So because they thought that they were only going to get one season of Legend of Korra, they decided that they were going to pitch the idea of them having a TV movie so they can be able to answer the question about where was Zuko's mother, and they would have had the original cast together, and it would have led up to a big adventure with, you know, Zuko finding out about the whereabouts of about what happened to Zuko's mom. And long story short, because the ratings of the first season of Legend of Korra were so high, Nickelodeon rejected the TV movie, and they wanted to have them do season 2 of Legend of Korra, which, oh god. And for those who don't know what I'm referring to, so season 2 was what many people consider to be the worst season of Legend of Korra, because Nickelodeon announced it to them at the last minute, and they had to rush a story like crazy, and they basically had to cobble in together, a complete season of Legend of Korra, like in less time than they would have in any other season of the series. So yeah, that's why pretty much, it's rushed, it's sloppy, it's pretty much, I mean, the first half is pretty slow, and then the second half, it does lead up to that cool fight with, Korra and the evil Avatar entity, in which, she has to fight off against them in the spirit world, but it ended up being a little bit silly and kind of disappointing. But everybody agrees that the middle part was the best part about it, because it introduced us to Avatar 1, and it showcases on the first Avatar. So at least that was a good thing about that season. But yeah, season 2 of Korra was awful. And yeah, I kind of question on Nickelodeon's decision on rejecting a TV movie based off of a cartoon that everybody loved. And, sure, Legend of Korra was a show that a lot of people liked, and they were willing to give more of a chance. But at the time that Legend of Korra was out, and if they would have announced that, hey, let's do a TV movie based off of Avatar: The Last Airbender, I can assure you that a lot of people would have jumped aboard on that as opposed to Legend of Korra.
I agree. They're now stranger to turning down TV movie ideas, because I think they've done that before with other shows.
Oh yeah, that's pretty much true. We dedicated an entire summer of all the TV movies that Nickelodeon had rejected, so yeah, you're right. Anyway, so yeah, so instead of tossing the project aside like pretty much every other TV movie or pilot that we've discussed about so far, Mike and Brian decided that they were going to take this concept and they were going to release it as a comic book series. They were going to dedicate at least maybe a couple of volumes so they can be able to answer the question about what happened to Zuko's mother. And that became a huge success. And that was like the Kickstarter for all the other Nicktoon comic book adaptations that we would have. So yeah, I think that if the TV movie would have came out either on TV, I think that Legend of Korra season 2 onward wouldn't exist. And if the comic book didn't happen, then, I would think, in my personal opinion, that comic books based off of the Nicktoons wouldn't even have happened. And if that would have been the case, then we probably wouldn't have gotten the Invader Zim TV movie because of the comics that Invader Zim released, and it becoming so popular that maybe it was the kickstart of the Invader Zim TV movie happening. And then we wouldn't have the Rugrats comic book adaptations. And, you know, who knows where that will lead up to. As of the time of this recording, it's not out yet. So, yeah, I think that regardless of what would have happened, Avatar the Search is incredibly important to Nicktoons. So yeah, first of all, as of right now, I have not read Avatar the Search, but my friend Joel from the Comic Book Cast has, and I kind of looked into it, and their direction was kind of interesting at first, about how apparently Zuko's mother had a relationship with another guy, and it could have been a possibility that maybe he's not Fire Lord Ozai's son, and he wanted to learn more information about that, and so he went over to the last location where she was at, and she read off a letter about all these times in which she would meet up with the guy, like, you know, during the time in which she was really miserable with Ozai and stuff like that. So, but long story short, yeah, Zuko is still Fire Lord Ozai's son. It's just that around the time, you know, they pretty much, you know, they left with one another, and it's a bit of a complicated story from what I understand. And as for somebody who hasn't read it yet, I can't really say too much about it. Anyway, so yeah, I think for the most part, with Avatar the Search, now let's take a look at it from a TV movie perspective. Do you think that maybe this would have been the Kickstarter for all the TV movies we would later have? Because if it would have came out in like 2012, then maybe we would have gotten a lot of TV movies much sooner.
Probably. The main reason why they were doing the experiment was because so many people fought to save the Jungle movie.
Yeah, that is true. And yeah, I even mentioned in my history of the Hey Arnold the Jungle movie, like, this was like around the time in which Operation Ruthless and the Hey Arnold Save the Jungle movie Facebook page were just starting. Like, they already started like around like 2010, 2011. So this was like around the time in which the movement was in its infancy. So, because of that, maybe we could have gotten the Jungle movie a lot sooner because fan demand was so crazy about it. And who knows? I mean, with the TV movies, with Avatar, the Search, if that would have become a huge success, the remaining comic books that Avatar: The Last Airbender had released, the one about where Toph was starting off the earthbending and metal bending school, and the one where Avatar was learning more about his past life, where he was the female airbender, and you know, all the other stories. I think that maybe those would have been turned into TV movies, and I think that Avatar: The Last Airbender would have still stayed in relevance, and Legend of Korra would have just been like a nice little side project. So who knows, maybe there would still be Avatar: The Last Airbender TV movie still going on today.
I agree. I think there probably would have been. It would have been interesting to see a lot of these things come earlier, but I think 90s nostalgia in itself was in its infancy at that point, and I think they were experimenting with the black, and then the Beavis and Butthead revival, but it seemed that it didn't really kick in that much until much later in the decade.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it didn't help that the Last Airbender movie pretty much, like, tainted the reputation of Avatar: The Last Airbender quite a bit, even though that was mostly M. Night Shyamalan's fault, not the creators. I guess this was kind of like their creators' way of redeeming themselves, because I guess if the theatrical movie didn't do so well, then they wanted to try the TV movie version, and I think that with the TV movie, I think that maybe if that would have been the case, if Avatar: The Last Airbender would have continued off as TV movies, then who knows, maybe Avatar: The Last Airbender would have turned into like a major franchise for Nickelodeon, similar to how Rugrats was back in the day.
That would have been interesting to see. I think that we would have seen shows go in cycles in terms of popularity, like Ren and Stimpy was originally the big hit, then Rugrats, then SpongeBob, and then Avatar. I think Avatar was like the only thing that came close to knocking down SpongeBob.
Yeah, I mean, if that would have been the case, then maybe Avatar would have kicked SpongeBob off the popularity wagon and releasing a lot of these TV movies. I mean, this was like around the time, like 2012, this was like when people were getting sick and tired of SpongeBob. So maybe Avatar The Last Airbender, if they would have released the TV movie first, then maybe people would have liked it, and then they would have thought, hey, let's release the remaining TV movies. And then maybe, who knows, maybe they would have done more TV shows based off of Avatar. Like, you know, Legend of Korra, they already done like the first season, so maybe they would have continued off with the remaining seasons, and maybe it would have been like a much better executed show than what Nickelodeon had given the creators to do. I mean, we already know about the scummy things that they did, like, you know, rushing season 2, airing the episodes of seasons 3 and 4 without announcing to anybody that they were on, having the remaining episodes of season 4 online and didn't even air them on TV until much later. And then, of course, there's the infamous clip show episode in which Nickelodeon told them, okay, it's either one of two things. You either have to do a clip show episode, or you're gonna have to fire a good majority of your animators because we can't pay you anymore. And so Brian and Mike were in a big pickle and saying, like, we don't want to fire anybody. We're going to do a clip show, and we're going to do it the best way that we can. And people hated that episode because it was just absolutely pointless. And, you know, clip show episodes are really, really hard to make good. And it wasn't, I mean, they did the best that they could, but Nickelodeon just really didn't care about Legend of Korra anymore at this point.
I think it's ironic that they booted Legend of Korra off around the same time that they started the revival proposal.
Yeah, I know, it's pretty ironic. But I think that if the TV movies would have came out, they would have seen that, hey, this stuff makes money. This stuff is giving us viewers. And then maybe they would have actually treated the Avatar franchise with the respect that it deserved. Who knows? Maybe in 2017, we would have already been getting the third incarnation, where we would have had maybe a female or a male earthbender. And maybe it would take place, like, much further into the future. And then we find out if Korra's decision about letting the spirits roam the real world have any major implications, whether it be good or bad. And maybe we get to see, like, the descendants of, you know, Mako or Bolin, or maybe, Tenzin's children. We get to see their descendants, and we just get to follow along of, you know, what would happen. I mean, like, Legend of Korra had, like, this 1920s and 30s feel. So I would have been interested about what their future, you know, of the earthbending Avatar would have been like. Would it have been, like, more futuristic, like our time, or maybe even further into the future, like a kind of like a steampunk world? So yeah, I think that the possibilities would have been endless. And it was all done by that one decision of not allowing Avatar The Last Airbender to have the TV movie.
Yeah, I think I would have actually liked to see Avatar go on a much longer road than it did, but unfortunately, as you said, The Last Airbender tainted the franchise as well as Nickelodeon's poor treatment of it of its later years, and it's a shame that I got the shaft, because I think that Legend of Korra was going places.
Yeah, that is true. If Legend of Korra would have been treated, it would have had a lot more of the creative freedom that Avatar did. I think it would have been a much more decent show. Right now, as the reputation of Legend of Korra is, it's a decent show, but nowhere near as good as Avatar. And that's because, you know, Avatar The Last Airbender was a nearly flawless masterpiece. It had a great balance of humor and action moments, while at the same time having memorable characters that you really connected to. With Legend of Korra, it went in a more darker direction. It was a lot more serious, and it basically was a continuation of a world that we loved watching. But it had problems. It had problems behind the scenes. It had problems with story structure, and yeah, I mean, you can tell, like, from the very first season onward that it was gonna be not as good as Avatar. So yeah, I think that Legend of Korra is still a great show, but it could have been better if Nickelodeon didn't hold the creators back. So at this point in time, Nickelodeon hadn't released a lot of comics based off of their Nicktoons, and Avatar The Last Airbender was one of the first. Now, we're not talking about the comic strips, like, you know, like they used to have in Nickelodeon magazine. We're talking about, like, comic books. and Avatar The Last Airbender was one of the first. And it was the one that continued the story of Avatar The Last Airbender, and it would have led up to Legend of Korra. And even Legend of Korra is having its own comic book adaptation, continuing off from season 4 onward. So, nowadays, we're getting a little bit more of the comics. Invader Zim has a comic book adaptation, and Rugrats will be getting its own comic book adaptation.
Rugrats isn't the only one getting comic books.
Oh, really? What else is getting the comic books?
Every classic Nicktoon, apparently. Rugrats is just the beginning.
That may be true, but there hasn't been an announcement about which is going to be the next one yet.
Yeah, it says in the article, but it doesn't specify which ones.
True, but, well, yeah, as of right now, it was recently announced that Rugrats was going to be the next one. So, yeah, they are taking advantage of the fact that comic books are becoming a lot more popular. You know, with the likes, ever since the likes of the Marvel movies coming out and the whole cinematic universe, comic books have become much more of a bigger read than ever before. The superhero genre pretty much was the major Kickstarter of people buying comic books again. And, you know, of course, all the other ones as well, like Walking Dead and so on and so forth. But I'm referring to, like, you know, people are reading comic books again. And it's nice that Nickelodeon is taking advantage of that fact. And partly we have to thank Avatar The Search for that. So, in a sense, I'm really mixed about this. At one point, I'm kind of glad that Mike and Brian didn't give up on Avatar The Search, because we wouldn't have had the comic books that we have now, and probably we wouldn't have had the Invader Zim TV movie. But at the same time, I would have loved to have seen the Avatar franchise continue. As of right now, Mike and Brian are no longer interested in continuing off the Avatar franchise.
Joe Murray didn't want to continue Rocco, and look at what we've got. So, you never know.
That is true. You never know. Alright, so I guess that should be it for this episode of Nicksmissal 4. Tune in next time, as we're going to be wrapping up this long discussion of Nicksmissal with a TV movie that was going to be based off of a 90s creator, but unfortunately was canceled to make way for an upcoming TV movie. So see you next time.
You got rejected, and your jeans that thinks you're a disgrace. You got rejected, and you feel like you've been punched in the face. You got rejected, tell your friends you let us boss in the mail. You got rejected, so just suck it up and go to hell.